turned on the news, cup of coffee, and immediately images of the towers. One of the towers was on fire.
They had just begun reporting on the first tower that had been hit with the plane. And I recall just thinking, how does a plane crash into a building?
And it was on every radio station about how the second airliner just hit the northern tower.
I turned on the TV and saw the planes hit the building and saw the buildings collapse, and went in and inventoried my duffel bags and packed everything up, and just in case. And about 2 weeks later, I was standing in San Francisco International Airport. My memories of September 11th, 2001, Tuesday morning, as most mornings, early riser, turned on the news, cup of coffee, and immediately images of the towers. One of the towers was on fire, and there was a lot of media speculation as to what had happened. It seemed odd that one of the more remarkable landmarks in New York could have accidentally been hit by an aircraft, so curious. Not too long after that, the second tower was struck by an aircraft, and there was little doubt that there was a deliberate attack that was occurring on U.S. soil. As those events unfolded, it was got my wife up, and I think we all reckoned with the fact almost immediately that our lives as service members, my wife also serving in the Air Force, and at the time I was in the California Army National Guard, that our lives were changed, and our children's lives were changed forever.
I remember the day because at that time my civilian job was as a middle school teacher, and so my morning always started early, about 5:30 here in California. And on that particular morning, as my usual routine, I would turn on the television to catch the news of the day, and they had just begun reporting on the first tower that had been hit with the plane. And I recall just thinking, how does a plane crash into a building? And there were still a lot of questions, as no one was sure what had happened. But as the morning kind of continued on, and I was going through my routine of getting ready for that day, and I happened to be watching the TV when I actually saw the second plane on live video feed crashing into the second tower. And my mind just went to, how does this happen 2 times? And so, I finished with my morning, and by the time I had gotten to school, to the school where I was teaching, the news reports were beginning to become a little more clear that it was intentional, that in fact they were probably acts of terrorists. Part of my brain was trying to deal with my students in the class, and part of my brain was, well, what am I supposed to do as part of the military? What am I supposed to do with my own family? Because there were reports that there were credible threats, at least initially, that other attacks were imminent, maybe in California. Was I supposed to be trying to take care of my family? What? It was just so much chaos that morning, I remember. But the chaos turned into just sadness, knowing that so many people had died that day.
So I got off work at 3 o'clock in the morning at the police department, and I was obviously sleeping. And one of the other lieutenants at the police department called me and woke me up and said, you might want to turn on the TV. And I turned on the TV and saw the planes hit the building and saw the buildings collapse, and went in and inventoried my duffel bags and packed everything up, and just in case. And about
2 weeks later, I was standing in San Francisco International Airport.
Having back-to-back summer deployments, we were returning basically the first week of September of 2001 with the mindset of taking the foot off the accelerator a little bit and doing a little R&R. I was one of the few people that were scheduled to fly the morning of September 11th, and I was coming in to do a 2-ship flight lead upgrade in the Viper. And so I was coming in early that morning, and I noticed on the way to work, as I pulled up along another car on Herndon, that the couple were very intensely listening to their radio. I thought it was a little odd, but I just continued on. And then the very next stoplight, I saw another couple, like, listening to the radio, and you could tell something was going on. So I switched from a CD over to the radio, and it was on every radio station about how the second airliner just hit the northern tower. And I knew right away that it was a national emergency.
Well, I seem to recall an interesting aspect of the day. It was a Tuesday morning, overcast. I was stationed at Stockton, on the Stockton Airport, and I was a Chinook flight engineer instructor. And although the morning there was immediate grounding of all aircraft by the FAA, there were wildfires burning to the east, and somewhat surprisingly, I think, after the fact, some of the few aircraft that were in the sky that day were firefighting aircraft. So I can recall at least 2 Chinooks flying that day with CAL FIRE supervision to fight wildfires. And I remember distinctly hearing from the pilots and through the traffic controllers that it was a day like no other, where it was so quiet on the radios. And as events unfolded, I think even the air traffic controllers were discussing their thoughts and perceptions of events. It started off very quietly for most, but we were busy there at Stockton, and took a while to digest the day's events. But again, I think few would have argued that there was immediate things that needed to occur, and the possibility of activations, deployments. I think we all saw it for what it was. It was going to affect our careers.
So we were scrambled on this aircraft, and that aircraft was saying that they were having a fuel shortage. But, you had to put yourself in the mind of the adversary, and like, what would you say if they told you to divert and you had to come up with an excuse to carry out your attack? So that's why we were scrambled. So NORAD was like, we're going to put 2 armed fighters on this aircraft immediately. So we blasted out. I don't think we ever got above 22,000 feet because the airliner was at 20,000 feet, and we were at max power. So Mach 1.3, 1.4, we were heading out there. Probably the fastest I've ever been that low over the state of California. I think we made it to San Francisco in 9 minutes from Fresno, and then proceeded westbound from there to go intercept the target. And the WADS controllers told us that it was a very sobering moment, but they told us, hey, we need one of you to get in a position to down the airplane, and the other one to basically investigate the aircraft. And my flight lead at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Ron Manor, Spanky Manor, he said, hey, Tigger, I'm going to put myself in a position to employ weapons as directed, and I want you to go investigate the aircraft to make sure that they're legit and it had not been hijacked. We're going to pull alongside of your aircraft and communicate to you with visual signals and with eyeballs on that you need to basically deviate from your present course. What WADS wanted was them to lower their gear and turn south away from the city. And what we were expecting was we would get a shoot down order authenticated if they proceeded straight towards the city when they hit feet dry, meaning when the aircraft crossed from ocean to overland, then we would get an order if things didn't change quickly. So we communicated this to the aircrew, and they refused to change course, which just elevated our concern. But what WADS wanted was, hey, I want an identification. Maybe see if you can see people signaling for help in the back. Maybe if the windows were all closed, that would be an indicator that this might have been a hijacked aircraft. So I couldn't do that from 500 feet away, so literally I gained separation and went very close to the fuselage of the 747 so I could put eyes on other people's eyes looking out. And what I saw was, to my relief, a bunch of people waving to me with smiles on their faces. They had no idea what was going on in our country that morning. I pulled alongside the cockpit, fully armed, F-16, and my visor was up, and I was looking straight into the eyes of the pilot and the co-pilot and the entire crew of the 747, and they all had their uniforms on. Their ties were straightened, and they had giant saucers in their eyes as what in the world is going on? And FAA had tried to communicate to them that, hey, the nation is essentially on lockdown. But as it turned out, they truly did have a fuel shortage, and they miscalculated their fuel, and they needed to land in San Francisco.
Understandably, there was a lot of anger about what had happened. So many American lives, by that point, a week or 2 weeks from the actual 9/11 attacks, that people were beginning to realize, well, there is a group that is taking responsibility, or at least they are boasting of having perpetrated this horrible act. So there was a lot of anger towards Muslim community in general. So it was trying to help these soldiers kind of work through those, because it was easy to just group a lot of people into one group and say we're angry at them. So part of my job in providing chaplain support was to kind of help them focus this energy, this anger, frustration into providing safety and security for our folks here in California as we were being called out to do our mission. And not just group anyone who looked like they might be terrorists and say, hey, you're the enemy. Because there was a lot of that, I remember, initially in the days following the 9/11 attacks, because we know that wasn't necessarily the case. So it was kind of like bringing a little perspective on the events that were unfolding in front of us.
We were augmenting the security at San Francisco International Airport. I was the operations officer for Task Force Aerosafe in San Francisco. And we were there for about 9 months doing airport security. It's a very large airport, so it was a big task. We had good troops. We had a good setup. Counter drug went in first, set up the operation. We fell in behind them with the 9080th SNS Battalion and augmented San Francisco International for the next 9 months before we went home.
It was a very successful asymmetric attack. I mean, they hit us where we were not expecting to be hit. I think the military took a lot of lessons for that. Obviously, the country rallied behind the cause of preventing this from ever happening again.
And it led to something that has lasted the last 20 years of deployments and changed the way that we as a Guard operate, and not as a strategic reserve, but as part of the operational force. So it's not just that it changed our lives that day or combat tours or anything like that. I think it's changed the aspect of what the National Guard actually is to being an operational force that's depended on by our country and the rest of the Army to be able to operate.
I have grown in appreciation of a lot of things that are around me that sometimes we have taken for granted. The recent events of the last 2 years, I know not related to 9/11, but in the same way, just the the constant calling of our soldiers and airmen to address security, property, and protection of life in our state, I hope has given us an appreciation of the things that we have and not take them for granted, because the moment that those things are affected, we feel the repercussions of that.
Well, I want to convey my appreciation to the service members and families of the California Military Department, our many stakeholders and employers that have stood by us. I'd be remiss if I didn't convey my sincere appreciation for 32 service members that gave their life during hostilities and during non-hostile incidents while overseas serving our country. It's those that paid the ultimate sacrifice and the families that they left behind. No amount of appreciation that I can convey will repay that debt. So it's with sincere gratitude to all those families, as well as everybody else that has worn the uniform. But serving overseas sometimes is the easier part. Sure, there's uncertainty, but by and large, the families that have enabled those deployments, that had a lot less information than the service members that went, I think some of those true tests have occurred in our living rooms. So I'm incredibly appreciative after this 20-year experience for all of our families that have supported our service members and our civilians as well. So it's been a remarkable 20 years, and as the anniversary comes up, it's time to think about the loved ones, those that have given their all, those that have made us better, who still serve and may have retired or left military service, and of course our families that enable us, that allow us to do this work. So please give thanks. It's probably one of the most important things we can do as we think of those that have gone before us.